Okay, so hey guys, and welcome back to another Axel 72 video, and in today's video I'm going to be giving my prediction for the Keith Thurman versus Sebastian Fundora fight. And so if you are new around here and you haven't yet subscribed, please do so, like the video if you do indeed like the video, and feel free to join the Patreon. This is a Patreon requested video, so this will be out a few weeks before the actual fight happens, and you can request your own content for the Patreon if you of course, like I mentioned, join the Patreon. And you can also use the Patreon for betting tips and general kind of boxing advice on any picks that you might have, and of course the link will be in the description. Let's get straight into this one, and this fight is kind of, in the way that everything else has worked out over the past couple of years, is of course the fight to make really in the super welterweight division for both of these guys. With the way that things have kind of especially worked out with Tim Tszyu. I mean, Tim Tszyu was meant to fight Keith Thurman, and that was originally meant to be set back in March of 2024, and this was when Tim Tszyu was riding a high and he was a world champion, and things were looking good. He'd, I think, had a defense or two already, and like I said, things were looking good for him, and this was, Thurman getting an opportunity in what is a comeback fight after having a couple years out, but it just didn't happen. Thurman got injured again when the build-up for that fight was meant to happen. That would have been for the Tim Tszyu's WBO title, but then, that also didn't happen, and then it was, I think, a torn bicep that Sebastian Fundora suffered with. He's had multiple different injury issues throughout his career, which has caused him to have multiple long breaks throughout his career where he's had hand issues, bicep issues, and, at the moment it's, like I say, impressive. I think Keith Thurman's just been somebody who has never really aged in his boxing career. He's always just been able to have these breaks, have these injuries, and then come back and still look really good. And it's just surprising. Obviously, it could be different. We could see that isn't the case in this fight against Fundora. Obviously, he made easy work of Brock Jarvis, but that could just be the level of Brock Jarvis. Sebastian Fundora will show if Thurman is still at that level. But I mean, Fundora's coming off an injury as well. Of course, this fight was set for being earlier, but then, Fundora got injured. But of course, Sebastian Fundora stepped in on relatively short notice to end up fighting Tim Tszyu. Obviously, that was also for the newly vacated WBC belt that Charlo vacated. And then he managed to beat him, of course, which was, somewhat controversial with the whole kind of head clash. And everybody remembers that bloody war of a fight. And then he got the rematch happening in July of last year, which was possibly the reason as to Fundora obviously won that well and he dominated and he ended up stopping him. But that was possibly the reason as to why Thurman fought Jarvis, because Thurman, he could have easily waited around a bit more to just be on the sidelines, and probably would have straight away gotten this opportunity against Sebastian Fundora. But when the rematch, which, to be fair, Fundora went and fought Shordale Booker in between, and it was kind of seeming a bit unlikely that we're actually going to see the rematch. The original ordering of it got kind of cancelled and changed, and that didn't really end up happening. And of course, Tszyu ended up fighting Murtazaliev and got knocked out. So again, it was unlikely that was going to happen, and maybe Thurman was waiting around to see if the rematch was going to happen or not. But obviously, Tim Tszyu managed to get back in the ring. He managed to get a win back in his home country, and then, of course, all the talks of the rematch started up again. So maybe when that started up, Thurman, possibly, coming off his injury and being repaired and stuff, was probably just thinking that it's not the time just yet for the Fundora fight to happen. He needs to, allow Fundora to have the rematch with Tim Tszyu, and then he's going to go and do his own thing. And, taking the Jarvis fight was a risky fight, to be fair. It was definitely a fight that, he didn't really need to take. Like I say, he was in a good position already. He didn't need to have that fight, but Jarvis was well ranked. He was, had been knocked out by Liam Paro, but that had aged pretty well with Paro going on to become a world champion, and he'd rebuilt a little bit and he'd gotten bigger, and like I say, he was there in Australia, to try and get a bit of a run going. And for Thurman to go to Australia and to have that fight and to knock him out in really impressive fashion, it was a risky fight, and I think it was a I suppose to an extent it was a needed fight because of the fact that he'd been out for so long to, get the cobwebs going, but you could have had a much easier fight to do that instead of going up against, a well-ranked contender who had only lost once and he was coming up in weight and he was young and hungry and everything like that. It was a very impressive showing in my opinion from Thurman, but again, Jarvis, we kind of saw that his level was limited in my opinion. Of course, like I mentioned, this fight makes sense as the fight to make. Of course, it won't be for the unified belts this time like it was once set to be with Thurman and Tim Tszyu a couple of years ago. But Fundora's been on a good run, returning to being champion, of course, like I say, winning the belt against Tszyu, then defending it against Booker, and then winning again against Tszyu. But I do believe with the context of what we have now with Fundora's past opponents like Tim Tszyu and also like Erickson Lubin, who he once beat when he was champion before he got knocked out by Brian Mendoza, with all the context of, Mendoza as well, Lubin, Tim Tszyu, Tim Tszyu obviously he's gone on to lose 3 times now against kind of higher level opposition. Lubin's gone on to lose, badly in a fight against Virgil Ortiz. We've seen, like I say, Mendoza go on to lose twice. He lost to Tim Tszyu and then he also lost to Boachuk as well. These names, I think with that context added on, Thurman obviously is on the older side possibly of his career. I would say he probably is the toughest test to date for Fundora in my opinion, especially I would say, on his second kind of run as champion in my opinion. Thurman getting back in the ring last year was nice to see because he is an entertainer in the sport, and he's always funny, on the mic and seeing him chat away and say whatever he has to say. He's always got a lot to say, and of course, like I mentioned, he made easy work of top contender Brock Jarvis after 3 years out, showing that he still does have it. Both of these guys have one loss on their resume, but the split decision loss to Pacquiao in 2019, yes, that was Pacquiao who was 39, 40 years of age, but Pacquiao, obviously, everybody knows him and what he's achieved, and, Pacquiao came back and managed to get a draw against Barrios. That split decision loss to Pacquiao isn't as bad of a loss as what a brutal KO loss, which I think won awards against Brian Mendoza looks for Fundora back in 2023. And of course, like I say, with Mendoza losing twice since then, it's not really the best of looks. Obviously, so the one loss is a bit different, but Thurman has had that timeout, continuous timeout, could, like I say, play a factor, could play a toll in the fact that he is 37 and Thurman is, Fundora, is 28. There is a big age gap between the two of them. Thurman's been talking a lot about the kind of chin distance, even though there is a drastic height and reach difference in this fight between the two of them. Thurman's been saying a lot about how the chin's not really that far away, even though he actually is, much taller. Again, I don't really know how much I believe that, but we're always going to see Thurman just saying some weird and random things. But of course, there is a drastic height and reach difference. It's always the case for the majority of opponents in which Fundora is in against. He's just naturally so gifted, and it would be interesting to see if Fundora was smaller and didn't have that reach, if he ever would have been able to reach the same heights as that he has reached. Again, I don't know, but for this fight, there, like I say, is a big difference. Fundora is 6'5.5" with an 80-inch reach, and Thurman is 5'9.5" with a 69-inch reach. So an 11-inch reach difference, and a lot of height kind of in between the two of them as well. It's definitely going to be something in which, Thurman's been in there with a lot of guys, but I don't think he's fought somebody similar to Fundora because there is just nobody really like him. He's one of the tallest, if not tallest, champions around at the moment, and that's in every weight division. That's including the heavyweight division. So it's pretty crazy, and yeah, it's just going to be difficult for any fighter to deal with Fundora just because of the genetics in which he has. But Thurman in his peak days, kind of through 2017, 2016, even later than that to be fair, and his 19-year career starting all the way back in 2007 has had plenty of really good names on his resume. Going through his resume, Sean Porter, Danny Garcia, Robert Guerrero, Julio Diaz, Jan Zarvek, and Mario Barrios, all former world champions. Barrios wasn't a champion when he'd fought Thurman, but Thurman was able to beat him well. And it's all of these guys, not just guys that are coming off loads of losses. Zarvek had recently lost his first fight. I think it was to Andre Berto again, and then he, gone straight in against Thurman afterwards. Julio Diaz, he's been in and been around there. He was on a decent run when he before he ended up fighting Thurman. You know, he got back to winning ways and had a few wins before he fought Thurman. Guerrero, I believe, had just come off not too long ago his loss against Floyd Mayweather, but other than that, he hadn't really had a loss on his resume. Obviously, these guys are going to lose afterwards, but just not at this time. They were still in pretty good points in their careers. I mean, Porter hadn't fought Crawford or Errol Spence when Thurman fought him. You know, Danny Garcia was the champion. That fight was for the world title, and that was to get Thurman a world title. Of course, he is a former welterweight world champion. It was a short reign because of injuries and other, promotional issues in which he's had in the past throughout his career has, led him to have quite a short reign as a world champion. He never actually defended his title, but like I say, he was a world champion at one point, beating Danny Garcia, who, in his prime days was a very successful and good champion. So again, just multiple top names that he has been in there and has fought, just better names in my opinion than that of Fundora. Fundora's, of course, fought from a world champion in Tim Tszyu, but again, it's just not the same kind of level in my opinion. To speak about both fighters individually though, Fundora, he of course, everybody knows about the size, the reach, the way that he's able to use that and to get his jab through. When he is getting his jab through, it's really impressive, but he just, in my opinion, needs to use it a little bit more. He does sometimes like to go into a little bit of a war and to get in the pocket a bit more than I feel like he does need to. But he's also, gotten very good at mastering kind of punching down on his opponents as well. And just like I say, still being able to manage good power whilst punching down. He carries power in his short shots as well, but I think he mixes up that power nicely. But I think Thurman mixes up his power nicely as well. He is able to work around the guard quite nicely. He can use his lead hand to kind of move out the way and push away the guard to then create gaps, but with the long range and the long arms. And when he's in close, he can really kind of loop around the back with his shots and, like I say, come around to a nice position. He makes you work on the ropes. If he gets you on the ropes, he'll keep you there and he'll really try and get his shots going. And that will be interesting to see if Thurman does just stay up on the ropes at any point. But like I say, he was able to get Tim Tszyu on that and in that position on multiple times, especially in the second fight. He was able to get Shordell Booker in that position until he stopped him. Again, it's quite brutal just being stuck in that position against Fundora. He takes up a lot of space. I mean, a lot of the ring can be covered quickly from Fundora's, just like I say, reach and distance. He punches all over. He's got a good jab, like I say, when he uses it. He can be hard to slow down when he does start letting his hands go, and he does kind of just chop away is probably the best way to describe, him when he is throwing. Negatives about him, again, I don't feel like he uses his full reach enough. In the first Tim Tszyu fight, he really didn't do that, but in the second fight, he started doing it a bit more and he showed it a bit more. And I would like to see him use it more in this fight because he could definitely catch Thurman coming in on multiple occasions, because I've seen Thurman get caught with jabs coming in quite a bit at times, and Fundora could definitely do that if he uses it. He's very open when he's throwing though, Fundora, which is something in which I've noticed quite a lot. He can kind of forget his defense at times and doesn't really use much defensive movement, doesn't really use much head movement either, and seems to just not really mind taking punches when he is throwing. Again, if it can work at a certain level, but if he gets caught with a shot like he did against Brian Mendoza, he is just leaving that gap there to get caught if you can explode into a punch, in which Thurman does like to do. He's not as accurate as Thurman, in my opinion. He does kind of miss and waste quite a lot of shots as well. Against explosive punches, of course, we've seen him get knocked out before, so I don't think he deals with that too well. I wouldn't say Tim Tszyu was much of an explosive puncher, especially when he was taking a lot of damage from Fundora, and he's pretty flat-footed as well for the most part. Again, a lot of his power can come from that, but it means, again, like I mentioned, there's not really much defensive movement if he is in any kind of bad spot himself. Thurman, as a fighter, he's got good counters. We've seen that from him, and I think with the gaps that Fundora leaves and the amount that he misses, he could definitely get caught through some counters from Thurman. He's composed, he carries his power well and mixes up that power again, knowing when to go with the heavier shots and knowing when to go in with the short, kind of nicer shots, working the angles, working the gaps well. He knows when to plant his feet. He's got good punch variety as well, and he does, show good defensive movement, and he can circle around and move around and, offer, like I say, defensive movement on the back foot, which could be something that's, again, a bit different with Fundora's opponents, especially with recent times. Again, you look at the Booker fight, you look at the two Tim Tszyu fights, they're just kind of stood in front of him. There's not really much defensive movement by them. And Thurman, I would like to hope that he does use that and can keep that going. Again, we'll see if he gets tired out if he is doing that. He can throw from different positions. He can work his footwork nicely to throw from different positions. He's pretty accurate for the most part as well. Again, I think more accurate than Fundora. He springs into his punches. He's got kind of a nice jumping hook, which could definitely, like I mentioned, catch out Fundora. and he puts his combinations together well. Negatives about him, he has, gaps when he's throwing a lot as well. He can get you know, over aggressive throwing combinations, and he can definitely get caught. He can get caught by overhand right a lot. His hands do drop, and I don't think he's got good enough reactions to not get hit when he is dropping his hands and trying to use his head movement. He doesn't use his head movement tremendous amounts, and when he does, it's not bad, but I don't think his reactions, like I say, are good enough to rely on it, and he does drop his hands a lot. He doesn't handle speed all that well, and just a lot of fast hand speed that are all landing on the target. That's what Pacquiao is able to have success with. If you can stop his momentum and slow him down at any point and, like I say, disrupt him, not allow him to get to that time to get the counters off, you can have success. He leans back when he is moving and, like I say, defending punches, which can, it's not always something in which I like when they are just leaning back, because it can mean if you are taking punishment and if somebody starts walking you down and you are just leaning back, you can be off balance. And he can definitely take a jab when coming in. In the Barrios fight, in the Pacquiao fight, he was continuously taking quite a lot of jabs and straight shots. And I think his physical strength isn't all that good. So if it does get in close, I don't know how he's going to be able to, or if he's even going to trying to go physically with Fundora. Fundora is not really physically the strongest either, but just his size kind of makes up for that. And it means that he can be, like I say, just imposing and physically demanding. Who do I think is going to win this fight? I think Keith Thurman's going to do it. I think he's going to go out there and TKO Sebastian Fundora in round 9 or 10. I think he's going to do it. It's going to be, I think, an impressive victory from Keith Thurman. I think if he can get past the jab, I think he's going to take probably a few jabs. If Fundora stops on his jab and uses it throughout the whole fight, he can have a lot of success. But I think there's going to be a time where Fundora just stops using the jab as much and tries to go toe-to-toe. And I think Thurman's going to catch him because Fundora does miss and he does leave gaps. And I think if Thurman is moving and he doesn't just sit on the ropes and go toe-to-toe with Fundora, I think he'll find moments to plant his feet and have success. And like I say, come in with the jumping hooks, mix up the power, make him take shots on the chin in which he hasn't had to take too much of before. And I think, of course, we've seen Fundora get knocked out badly before. Thurman does carry power. Obviously Thurman's been on a bit of a run where prior to the Jarvis fight, he hadn't really knocked anybody out in a while, but he still does carry power and he still can hurt opponents. And if he does land, I think he is going to land well enough to be able to knock out Fundora. And at 37 years of age, I think he's going to return to becoming a world champion. And it's going to be, exciting and interesting to see. And I'll be definitely excited to see Keith Thurman as a world champion. And also it will be interesting to see who he goes after if he does become a world champion, because, there's guys like Xander Zayas, who's a WBO, WBA champion. Fundora was getting, told a little bit that he was a bit of a duck from the Zayas fight because he went to go fight Tim Tszyu again. Obviously Zayas has gone on to win that WBA belt recently and he's looking in a good position, so that could be a good fight to be made. Virgil Ortiz is WBC interim champion. He's been like that for a while, but the WBC never really seemed to order their interim champions, or at least not for a while, so that's not really been ordered. But Ortiz Jr. is having the whole problem with Golden Boy and trying to make the Ennis fight. If that Ennis fight doesn't happen, we could see Thurman versus Ortiz. I want to see Thurman be active if he is going to be a world champion for the final, possible few years of his career, or, if he loses badly, he could retire. So I want to see him go in there with the big guys. I think he will only take on the big names at this point. I mean, Samake is number 1 ranked with the WBC and he's fighting Hadrir Biaj on the Akoli undercard on his next fight, but that just isn't a big enough fight either for them two names to fight Thurman, in my opinion. Like I say, I think Thurman's only going to want the big names, and the big names are there in the super welterweight division. Like I say, Zayas is now a big name, Ortiz Jr. is a big name, Ennis is a big name. There's a few guys there that definitely could be. I don't really want to see a Tim Tszyu get thrown back in there again. I just don't feel like we need to see it. I feel like if Tim Tszyu can go out there and, earn his way and actually beat a couple top contenders and then get himself back in that position, I wouldn't mind seeing it. But for the moment, I just don't care about seeing Thurman versus Tim Tszyu. So even though Tim Tszyu's gotten back to winning ways, I just don't want to see that. So hopefully we don't see that. And like I say, go Thurman against another one of the big names in the division at the moment. But yeah, that is it for today's video. Hope you did enjoy. Like the video if you did indeed like the video, subscribe if you're new, and thanks for watching.